All right, so for digital, we want to learn where do these digital images come from. So really, we're not even necessarily talking about X-ray images to start with here. We're just talking about images being displayed on a screen, okay? And that's sort of what we've all pretty much grown up with for the most part. We've all had, computer screens since we were very, very young, so for the most part. So let's say a couple of things. Digital images, right, those viewed on a screen, okay, whether photographic, a picture, radiographic, an X-ray, or fluoroscopic, which is kind of like an X-ray, but it moves, it's like a video X-ray. All these things displayed on a screen, so this image you're seeing on this screen, the one I'm viewing on my screen, are displayed, and what they are is a matrix of I'm just going to read straight from what they say, and then I'll try to translate it. They consist of a matrix of numerical values that can be stored in a computer, okay? Said simply, they're a bunch of little squares, right? Each square has some value. That value is stored as a computer file. So each square on the screen, each pixel that you'll see on a screen is a separate computer file. The computer knows where that pixel is on the screen, right? It's going to be in a row and a column, right? So the top left pixel in that screen, right, is row 1, column 1, right? And the bottom right pixel on the screen is the furthest row over and the furthest column down, however many columns and rows there are on this screen here. So it's a matrix. That's what we mean by a matrix. We don't mean, the science fiction movie about people being in an artificial reality, right? We mean there's a literal two-dimensional, like grid on the screen, okay? And each square has has a numerical value. It's a number assigned to each square. That number is going to give us a color, right? Or in radiography, in X-ray terms, it's going to give us a shade of gray. Okay, that number will each be a shade of gray. All of those little individual squares put together, and each one displaying a different color, will give us this. Will give us an image that we're looking at. These words on the screen, for example. So that's important. Each square is a file. Each file has a number value, and that number value represents a color or a shade of gray. Okay. For radiographic images, the numerical value stored for each cell, each square on the screen, will represent a brightness. Okay, the pixel can go be all the way black, right? The pixel can be not turned on at all. Okay, or the pixel can be turned on completely white. Okay, each pixel, each little square in the matrix can be as dark as possible, not turned on at all, or as bright as possible, maximum value. Okay. We call these squares, I've said it a bunch of times already because it's an easy word, everyone knows it. We call each of these squares a pixel, okay? If you've never heard what a pixel stands for, it stands for a picture element. It's a part of the picture, okay? Picture element. Later on, we're going to talk about decels and voxels, which is the image receptor and body equivalent of a pixel. We'll talk about those later. If you read the material, you already saw that. So that's what a pixel is. A pixel is part of a matrix. Each pixel has a numerical value stored as a computer file, and where we get our displayed images from. This is an example of a matrix, just to show you that, this is a simple, I think, 6 by 6 matrix, so there's 36 pixels on this screen, in this matrix, and they're divided into rows and columns. So again, top left pixel is going to be designated row 1, column 1. And in this case, because there's 6 columns, 6 rows, the bottom right pixel, column 6, row 6, or row 6, column 6, right? That's going to be part of the file, right? Part of the file is the value for that pixel, the value that pixel will have. Another part of that file is what row and column, so spatial location, where does that pixel sit, okay? So made up of individual picture elements, each designated by its column and row number. How come we don't see these individual squares? I mean, we see these squares, this 36 by 36 matrix, but how come we don't see the individual squares on our screen? Just because they're small, okay? If they were much larger, they would be much more apparent. And I think everyone's had experience with low resolution photographs, right? Pixelated pictures, right? Or if you try to like zoom in, it's not a great example, but if you try to like zoom in really far on a picture, you notice that it gets kind of blocky, right? Yeah.
Are there digital radiographs that use vector imaging instead of pixel imaging?
Ooh, vector imaging. I know what a vector is. What's vector imaging?
It would be like, it decides like where the mathematical terms of the image are, and then you can like blow it up as big or small as you want.
I know there are, what do they call it?
Instead of the pixels.
Yes, but I think it's going to use different terminology for us. I know what you're talking about, but it's going to use different terminology. I'm not familiar with that term, though. That's my problem. I know what a vector is, and know what imaging is. I just don't know what vector imaging is. So I'd have to see the definition, but I think I know what you're talking about. And I think, yes, there are operations in pre or post processing that can do that. Yeah. Okay. Good. You're asking good questions. If there's a question I don't know the answer to, then you're asking good questions. Good. All right. So now that we understand there's rows and columns, each column's going to have a value. Let's talk about those values and how they're going to change what we see. Okay, so this is a simplified digital cross-section of a thigh, okay? So you can imagine a thigh, right, taking a slice of a thigh and looking down the cross-section of that thigh, okay? You would notice that the thigh is surrounded with skin, and deeper in the thigh there's muscle, and then right in the middle of the thigh there's a bone, right? Again, you're taking the length of a thigh, slicing it, and then looking down at that slice of thigh, okay? So each pixel has a number value in this case, okay? And the skin value the black background value, my bad, is going to be 0 in this case. So we see a bunch of zeros for the pixels that will represent the black background. 0 for this pixel, for those pixels will say that pixel's not turned on, okay, or it's black, it's left completely dark, okay. It is in our terms from last module, we talked about radiographic density, right? The darkest parts of our image are what are called the densest parts of the image. So radiographically, those black parts, those parts where the pixels are not turned on, are the parts of the image that received the most exposure, right? The darkest parts of your images are those that got the most exposure. So pixels will be deactivated on the screen, showing you a black area, when that part on the image receptor received the most exposure, okay? For my newest people, I know not that you haven't had maybe nothing yet, right? So there's a thing called an X-ray tube in the X-ray room, right? It's the thing that sits above the table, produces an X-ray beam. You can think about the X-ray beam just like light, okay? It is the same type of, so I'm digressing a little bit for many people. It's the same type of thing as visible light, okay? It's made in a very similar way that visible light is made. Okay, we just do it at high energies. Okay, so the X-ray beam is kind of like light. The only big differences are visible light you can see, where an X-ray beam you can't see. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it or touch it, right? Similar with visible light, although you can see visible light. So we produce something called an X-ray beam, and it's different than visible light because visible light, it hits something and then bounces off. It can reflect, and that's how I can see all of you right now, right? The visible light's bouncing off the lights in the room and getting to my eyes, getting from me to your eyes so we can see each other. X-rays work differently because X-rays pass through the body. Okay, so rather than bouncing off the body, X-rays pass through. Now, some body parts are thick and dense, some body parts are thin and not dense, right? So the X-ray beam will more or less pass through different body parts, right? The thicker parts it doesn't pass through, and the thinner parts it passes right through, okay? That X-ray beam passes through the patient, having some of it absorbed, some of it not, okay? And then it hits this thing called an image receptor, okay? The image receptor is a lot like, this type of image receptor is a lot like a piece of photographic film, okay? There is something equivalent to film in here that is exposed, and then it's taken and processed, okay? In the digital radiography, and I know some of you know this is a CR cassette, but in digital, so I'm acting like it's a film cassette. In digital radiography, a similar thing is happening, right? An X-ray beam passes through a patient, and it exposes the image receptors. We call this thing the image receptor, okay? And then the image receptor is going to be divided up into its own little squares, and each little square is going to get an amount of light hitting it, an amount of X-ray light hitting it, right? If it's like my hand on the receptor, right, then the parts between my hand, the X-ray beam is not going to be absorbed at all. It's going to pass just straight down and hit these parts and completely blacken out these areas, right? But the areas where my bone is, right, the X-ray beam will be stopped. So the area underneath on the image receptor where my bone is will not receive as much exposure, okay? And because of that, we can build an image, a shadow of the body. It's really what it is. It's a shadow of the body, right? And log it on a receptor. Then the receptor can take it and just use it to display it on the computer. But that's what an image receptor is. Good. So then we take something like this, a cross-sectional image of the thigh, and we notice that the areas that received a lot of exposure, the background, where there was nothing in the way of the X-ray beam, are going to have values of 0, right? Completely black pixels have a value of 0. That's just the nature of computer screens, right? When they're turned off, they're black, okay? Further in, deeper in, or just at the level of the skin and further in than that, all these pixels surrounding this area have a value of 11, okay? These values don't mean anything special right now. We're just saying that 0 is off and any number higher than that is the pixel getting brighter, okay? So this value of 11, it is lighter than the black background, right? But not as light as this middle value of 555, which would represent bone, okay? It's a little blocky, right? Because these pixels are sort of large, right? But once these pixels, once the matrix gets big and the pixels get small, we sort of, that blockiness goes away and we see, you know, more or less a continuous image. But it's always divided up into pixels. Each pixel gets a value. So all these pixel values of 11, we've got sort of a dark gray, right? Pixels turned on a little bit. And then deeper in, the deepest part where the bone would be, 555, well, that's going to be a much brighter pixel, right? So we're going to give that the designation of light gray or white or whatever you want to say, right? In this case, light gray. So now we can build up a cross-sectional image of the thigh with each pixel having some value representing a brightness. Brightness is just going to be lighter or darker. So with X-rays, we don't have color, right? We just have black or white and everything in between, right? All of the spectrum of shades of gray in between black and white. Okay, good. The next thing we want to learn is, for a given physical area, like each of these matrices, this matrix on the left, A, and the matrix on the right, B, occupy the same area, right? You can measure how big that square is, and both of those squares are the same size, okay? But image B's matrix is bigger, okay? So given a fixed physical area, a larger matrix would mean smaller pixels, okay? Image A on the left, matrix A on the left, has a 6 by 6 pixel matrix, so 36 pixels fit into that area. Image B on the right has 12 pixels across, 12 pixels down, so 144 pixels within that matrix. Both matrices are the same physical size. One has smaller pixels. So which one's going to give us better detail? B, right? B has smaller pixels, right? Good. So when the area is fixed, like two computer screens of the same size, right? The one with the one that you'll call higher resolution, right, is the one that just has more pixels in that physical area, a bigger matrix, and a bigger number of pixels. And you know this because this is how you choose like TV screen resolutions and stuff like that, right? You buy 1080p TVs, or you buy like a 4K TV. I think they even have like 8K or some nonsense now, right? It's all sort of almost irrelevant because the human eye cannot detect those tiny differences that well. So and it takes more power to run them too. But so those things to keep in mind when you buy those when you look for those kind of things, when you're shopping for those kind of things. But that's the deal. For a given matrix size, the larger the matrix, larger number of pixels, the smaller the pixels are. Okay. So here's an example of how this can play out in like just a black and white image, okay? So they give you this image of the girl here, right? Well, we know it's a girl when we look at image C, right? But image A doesn't tell us much. We know it's a person, right? Image A is a 26 by 36 matrix. So notice the matrix is not a square, right? That's nothing like super important to notice. Just notice the matrix isn't a square. It's taller than it is wide. So 36 pixels tall, 26 pixels wide, okay? And we don't have a lot of resolution. Presumably, if this is a computer file, right, and let's say all three of these were the same computer file, if you tried to display image A on a well, image A would be as if you were displaying on a low resolution screen. Okay, so bring it up on your old, clamshell flip phone, right, from 2001, right? And you're gonna get an image closer to image A, where it looks blurry. The information's all there in the file, let's say, but our screen can't show it to us because the screen's matrix doesn't have enough pixels to give us detail, right? You go to image B has a bigger matrix. The physical size of the matrix is the same. The physical size of all three images is unchanged, but image B has just more pixels in that matrix, so it gives us more detail. And now we can start to see some facial details. You start to notice shadows a little bit better. It looks clearer. And then, of course, you get to image C, and by then it's pretty cleared up. Yeah.
So the bigger the pixel matrix is, the clearer the photo will be?
Yeah, the higher the resolution will be. Yeah, yep, absolutely. So you can say things like it has better detail, it's clearer, it has better spatial resolution, right? All of those things are sort of equivalent ways of saying that. Yeah. Okay. Let's take a look at the effective spatial resolution of different types of imaging modalities. A modality is a way of taking images of the body, right? Ultrasound is a modality. X-ray is a modality. Nuclear medicine is a modality. So these are different modalities. Notice nuclear medicine, it gives you an effective pixel matrix of 64 by 64. Not very high resolution, right? So you're not going to be diagnosing, small pathologies in the body, right? Like a small fracture with nuclear medicine, right? The point of nuclear medicine is to put some radionucleotide into the body and let it find a cancer, right? Let it find some cancerous process, and then what does it do? It attaches, because we've made it this way, it attaches to the cancerous process, it floats around the bloodstream, attaches to the cancer cells, and then the radioactive element just begins to emit radiation, and we have detectors all around the patient that find where that's coming from in the body. All we need the nuclear medicine technique to tell us is where in the body is there cancer hiding, so we can go kill it, right? And so we don't need very high resolution. We just need to know on this person where's the cancer hiding, and so we can direct, for example, we can direct our secondary procedures of like radiation therapy, right? Using high energy beams of radiation to literally destroy the cancer, targeting it directly. And in order to do that, you sort of need to know where it's at in the body. A scan like a positron emission scan, PET, positron emission tomography, or other types of nuclear medicine can give you that information, but you don't need high resolution to do it. So we don't have high resolution. Sonography, right? Higher resolution, but you're still not going to find that it has as great of detail as an X-ray image does, for example, right? Sonography, roughly 128 by 128 pixel matrix, and not that big, right? MR and CT, higher, right? 512 by 512. Now you're getting into quite large matrices, but then you get to CR and DR, right? DR and CR stand for direct radiography and computed radiography. They are two types of digital X-ray systems. Yes.
So if digital radiography and computer radiography have better image, like a clarity, why do you have to get an X-ray before you can get an MRI in most cases?
So that you can because MRIs are expensive.
Even though they have less involved.
Yeah, but they're expensive to run, expensive to do the image. So the insurance is not going to want to just go straight to doing the MRI when the answer might come when the answer might be able to be gathered from the X-ray, right? So you want the extra, you want the cheap versions first. It's a money game, right? That's all it is. MRI can tell you more, but it's more expensive, takes longer to run. And another good example would be, and I'm getting off track a little bit, but it's okay. Another good example would be like somebody is suspected to have had a stroke, a brain bleed, right? And MRI would give us the best information about it, but MRIs take a long time to actually take the image, 45 minutes or whatever, right? Take the many images that they can make, and the patient has to keep still for that time. If it's like a life-threatening emergency, we can't take the time to run them through the MRI machine, right? We're going to put them in the CT scanner first, right? CT scanner is going to give them a lot of radiation, but have similar detail, right? But we're going to put them in CT first because it's cheaper and it's quicker, right? We want quick and cheap first to get quick and easy answers, and then we want to put them through the more complicated equipment. Now, sort of a similar answer to why would you do plain film imaging before you do MRI? It's to get the quick and easy answer first, see how much you can answer with the quick and cheap way, and then try to do things a little more expensively. But MRI often requires prior authorization, right, before it's ordered by the doc and stuff like that. So it's usually a money game.
They're always denying without prior.
Yeah, they need that for whatever. It's sort of similar to what I was saying, but they need that prior set of images done on plain film first, usually. Yeah.
And the other thing is, historically, we had X-ray long before we had MRI.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, you know,
It's just a more complicated thing, right?
And the physician, for what he is doing, he may not need the
Yeah.
MRI gives him more detail,
Much more,
but
right.
to actually do a surgery, it may not be that useful. to
Right,
have
right.
the X-ray.
We might get a lot of the answer, most of the answer, all of the answer by doing those first initial, plain film images, and then we might not even need the MRI, right? So, yeah, the MRI would give you more information, but just the cost of operation, the logistics of getting someone into MRI and out is different than X-ray. So, yeah, it's a good, really good question, because it's not a straightforward answer, right? It's sort of a bunch of different reasons why. Yeah. Good. So, anyways, by the way, I want to just make sure we get this right. DR stands for direct radiography. It does not stand for digital radiography. Okay, you got to just work with that. I know there's something called digital radiography, right? We don't ever abbreviate it DR though. Okay, DR is a special abbreviation, a technical abbreviation, standing for direct radiography. It's a special type of digital radiography, where we don't have a cassette, or if we do have a cassette, an image receptor, it doesn't have to be moved around, right? It is the type where you shoot an image, don't move the cassette, and image is displayed on the screen for you without nothing being moved between those two things. CR, or computed radiography, involves an image receptor like this, right? Placed beneath or on one side of a patient, and an exposure is made, and then you take that cassette over to a processor, let the processor process it, right? Image is displayed on the screen, the cassette is reset, ready to go again, and then you take it back and you use it again. Okay, that is CR. We're going to learn all about CR and DR the next time we meet. Okay. If you have never heard what MRI is, it stands for magnetic resonance imaging. It's a type of cross-sectional, you see these sort of cross-sectional images of the body where we use no radiation. CT stands for computed tomography. A tomogram is a cross-sectional image of the body. Okay, so MRI can make tomograms, it makes cross-sectional images. We just happen to call CT computed tomography. CT was first, well, CR and DR were first, but then CT came along. Okay, anyways. Let's talk about now that we know there's the way images are displayed, we know that there is a matrix, right? A matrix